today the title of my talk is like AI for engagement. I mean, before I start, I want to say, I think I know quite a lot about AI, but close to zero about engagement, right? But so this is really my take on, how AI could be useful in the kind of field of engagement. So more about myself, right? I was like, Guan introduced me. I was a front-end intern at Gametize. Quite some time ago. Not sure if my code is still around, but hopefully no one still has to deal with that. But I think one thing I want to say is like the experience really influenced me quite positively in terms of how teams are run, how do we kind of treat each other, and I think it's something that I've kind of brought forward to all my other ventures. After that, I kind of did this like computer vision, augmented reality startup. And the idea there is to basically use computer vision to detect objects and then use augmented reality to basically add information on it. It didn't really succeed, but what I really kind of took away at that point is like how good AI was, even, and this like, quite 2017, how good it was in basically being able to solve problems which it seemed like only humans can do. And I knew that, I mean, at the point I knew that I wanted to work in AI. So then I kind of joined this company, Handshakes, to do AI research there. So there we kind of deal mostly with text financial documents. And basically the past 6 years or so, I've been building like various AI features that power our products. Personally, I'm also kind of interested in making small models do useful things. And, especially now with model sizes becoming bigger and bigger, the number of companies that can reliably like run these models are getting smaller. And I think it's just a philosophical thing. Like I feel that this kind of technology, they should be available to everyone and shouldn't be controlled by certain entities. So today I have a few things prepared. My agenda is basically like what can AI do, how to use AI, how to use AI better, and also then like how do we keep up with the trends. At any point, if you have any questions, just feel free to either stop me or type in the chat. I also have my slides here. I will share it in the chat later as well. So beginning, right, like what can AI do? And I'll kind of focus more on text because I think text is what is most interesting right now with kind of the advances in like ChatGPT and etc. But also because text is really my forte, right? Like my day job is working with text, making decisions on text. So I've kind of split it out into two things, making decisions and then generating text. I've put some like names of models. Those are not so important. Like if you want to kind of search for them, they are just keywords that you can use to search. So with text, you can do like classification. And if you're like generating text, then you can also do chat, content generation, some other cool stuff like natural language interface, agents. I'll go more in detail into these. I'll try to kind of give some examples that will be relevant, from an engagement or gamification point of view. So for classification, if you have feedback from your users, you can classify them into whether or not there's a positive feedback or negative feedback. So that's kind of a simple classification task you can do. You can also kind of have it a bit more fine-grained. You can say whether or not this feedback was on the duration, whether or not this feedback was on the, the content and so on, right? The other kind of thing is like, one thing I kind of realize is like Singaporeans are very good at answering multiple choice questions, right? We have been trained from young to basically do like multiple choice questions. And oftentimes it means that we are able to answer multiple choice questions without actually even knowing or understanding the topic material fully. And I feel then really the only way to kind of gauge someone's understanding is to ask them an open-ended question and get an answer to that. So classification can be used to basically figure out whether or not the user understands the question and is able to give some kind of reasonable answer. If there's a wrong answer, Or if someone, for the question of like what is fishing, thinks it's about like going to the ocean and catching some fish, you can kind of say like that's not that, and like direct them to the relevant information. You can also think about classifying users into groups, based on their personality, based on the kind of information we have on them, and also based on their skill and aptitude levels. So chat, right? Chat is kind of the most interesting user experience right now because of ChatGPT. How do you kind of create an experience for users in chat? You can make the entire experience of learning in terms of getting information through chat. Not sure how many of you guys remember, like back in the day, there are those books where you basically have a choose your own text adventure game. You kind of go to like page 1, ask you to like make a decision, and then go to like a certain page, and based on that, you basically are going through an adventure. You can kind of imagine the same kind of experience here as well, right? Like you can have personalized adventures based on the kind of decisions that someone makes. So if you have a security training, based on how they kind of react, how they kind of do, how they respond to certain challenges, we can change this game for them. Again, then personalized learning, like if you notice that someone is not able to answer some questions, help them to basically focus on those concepts and make sure that they are engaged in that before moving on. And then answering questions, so like, helping users to clarify concepts, or even if it is pointing to the right documentation in your internal knowledge base. These are things that can be done using chat. Content generation. So in this, you have a topic, you want to create some kind of reading material for someone to get up to speed. You can use it to generate reading material. You already have the reading material. You use AI to basically generate question answer pairs from this material. And then of course you can look at it and see whether or not these are useful questions you want to show to your user. Stepping up one other level, like if you can have like dynamic reading material, and again, kind of personalized to someone's skills, someone's interests, and challenges, quizzes, which are really tailor-made to somebody's kind of interest. And then with this generative AI, you're also able to kind of provide real-time feedback on answers. If you notice that someone has made a wrong assumption, wrong understanding of something, then you can kind of point out the part in their understanding which is wrong, and tailor the response and the feedback based on that. I think the next thing, I think this is really quite cool, is like natural language interface, right? So the premise of this is that you have users kind of speak to your application in natural language. One example is like if you have a database with statistics, analytics, and you don't want your user to either have access to the database or have to learn a particular query language. So for example, like SQL, or if you have a search engine, you need to learn that search engine syntax. So you can just kind of give users the ability to kind of express in words what they want to achieve and convert that into the specific query. I think this is really quite interesting because a lot of times how this kind of analytics, how this kind of information is exposed to users from a user experience point of view is like, buttons, filters, drop-down menus, which every company has a different way of implementing it, and every time a user kind of uses this app, they have to basically learn how to use that company's interface. So this, I feel, is an easier way and more direct of how a user actually wants to get information. And then of course, then you can also think about if your app is programmatic. So for example, if I have an API that sets the dark mode for my app, and the user says, I want to use the app in dark mode, then I can call that API to basically change my app. This is preferable as opposed to getting some AI, like a model, to dynamically go and start editing your code. And it's more of a configuration change. But you can imagine, I mean, this is more of a basic example, but you can imagine how if you have really complicated user UI user experience, you can kind of make that easier and reduce the need for the user to kind of learn your company's specific UI and help them kind of achieve their goals easier.
Vivek,
Yeah,
Sasha has a quick question which I think deserves
sure.
a bit of attention.
Okay.
He asked, can you tell more about dynamic reading formats?
Okay, so for that, what I was kind of talking about is you can basically kind of create, reading material based on someone's skill level. So for example, if I'm a tech person, I know what phishing is. Giving me reading material about phishing is not going to be very interesting to me. I'm just going to like glance over it like, yeah. But then if you know that I'm kind of more inclined into certain parts of security, kind of tell me about other algorithms, things that are being used, then I'm much more likely to be engaged with that piece of content. So that's really what I have in mind. Like, can we create material that is kind of personalized to each user's both skill and interest? Does that kind of answer your question, Sasha?
Yeah, I think that's good. I think we can elaborate a little bit more in the Q&A. So Sasha, please stay tuned.
Okay. This part I kind of put here because it's kind of the more interesting thing that's kind of going on in AI right now, but it's still at a very early stage. But the idea is that, you have a model that chooses the sequence of actions to take. So it's able to plan for itself, it's able to reflect on its previous steps, it's able to have access to tools, is it a calculator, is it a search engine, is it a database, etc. So basically this helps to kind of create much more complex generalized behavior. I just kind of put this here as a, keep an eye on this, but this is not really ready for production yet. I want to quickly talk about other modalities as well, like image, sound, and video, and how it might be relevant in terms of creating engagement with, people. With image, basically object detection creates some kind of gateway into the real world. So if you can get people to take pictures of things that are in the real world, so it ensures that if you create some kind of what's that called? Kind of search games. They have to go to different places to find things. So that's one way of kind of integrating image kind of stuff in engagement. Again, then you can kind of, instead of having to train like an image model, you can use some kind of QA model to say that, okay, is there this kind of item in this image, and make some kind of decisions based on that. You can also generate images, to go along with your contents that you're reading materials that you're creating for your users. I also put sound here because I think sound is at a stage which is very mature right now. So in terms of both speech to text and text to speech, there are models which very reliably are able to basically convert what I'm saying into text, which I think is what like Zoom is doing right now, right? Like as I'm speaking, it's converting all of that into text and creating some kind of summary out of that. And also then models are good at kind of basically creating speech out of text. So some kind of AI assistant that's able to kind of read out whatever you do. So then you can imagine that the user experience for the user can be completely hands-free, device-free. Like you can just kind of talk as though you're talking to someone else. Video, I think maybe it's not very mature yet, but one thing to note is that video is just like sequence of images. And if you have kind of been following some of the companies, they are doing pretty impressive like text to video stuff. So I think
Vivek, what are some of these companies that you know of doing
so
text to video?
so OpenAI, I think like a few weeks ago, they released this model called Sora, SORA. So it's basically you give it some text prompt and it generates like 10 to 15 seconds worth of video. So if you kind of see it, it's pretty impressive because it's able to generate all of these frames, but it's consistent with each other. So it's kind of a smooth flowing video. Yeah. So I think one thing I want to kind of point out when you kind of look at these capabilities is that, generating stuff is generally much more difficult than making decisions. So just like how speaking a new language is harder than understanding it. Like if you were to watch like Korean drama enough, after a while you will know some level of like Korean, but you may not. But like speaking it is quite different. And same like how a user, it's easier for me to do a multiple choice question than an open-ended question. So at this point, I've kind of gone through like various capabilities of use cases of AI and engagement. The next part is about how we are going to use AI. By this point, I just wanted to stop and see if there's any questions that you guys want me to talk about.
Yeah, I think it did not occur to me, but it is true that speaking a new language is harder than understanding it. This is why I still couldn't speak Cantonese today, even though I can understand when somebody says that to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Why is it still the case today that even so? Do you think there will be a day where AI will actually there will be a chasm that AI is able to cross where generating is as easy as making decisions?
I think so. I think fundamentally that thing is true, right? Generating is harder than making decisions. I think AI now we have kind of reached the stage where for text, for image, we are able to kind of generate pretty coherent sounding like text. But this is not true like maybe 2 or 3 years ago where most of the AI was more focused on maybe like text classification or making some kind of decisions on that. So I think it's also why we are kind of seeing the kind of explosion of this concept of like Gen AI, because until maybe like 2 years ago, we haven't really had that capability yet. And we've kind of reached that capability and we are starting to make use of it. But I think it will always be true that, generating is harder than making decisions.
And I think it's also about the quality of the content as well that we'll talk about. Today, somebody just shared with me a follow-up email, right? She has gone through her job interview and she just asked me, like, what do you think of my follow-up email? And the moment I look at it, I was like, that's from OpenAI, right? Just from ChatGPT, right? And she said, yes. I was like, it's too obvious. And recently I've been following 𝗶𝗲𝗲 from 𝗚𝗺𝗲𝗶𝘶. He's one of the top influencers on LinkedIn, and he actually put out a post to say that it is very annoying to generate comments using a Chrome extension via ChatGPT. Stop using it because it's really annoying, right? So the quality, even though when I look at the generated content, the quality is actually it's perfect English, right? Everything is coherent, but it is not meaningful. And Prashant also has a good point here as well. He asked about difficulty. What are we actually talking about? Processing power, complexity, accuracy.
Right? Yeah, I think it's a combination of all of those, right? So I'll kind of speak a bit about that later as well. Like generally, models to do generation, you need much more data, much more parameters, much more like size, and then of course, then getting like good generated output is much harder. Yeah.
Wonderful. Alton, we come back to your question later.
Yeah. Alton's question, if you can, address it a little later. He wants to know about Devin.
Yeah.
Oh, so how many of you have seen the demo from Devin?
Not me.
I've seen and I applied for play usage, but not this one yet.
So basically, Devin is kind of like the first, I would say, first kind of product that's using what I mentioned just now about agents. And the idea is basically that you have this AI that's basically a software engineer. So you tell it some high level goals of what you want to achieve, and it kind of goes out, spends quite a lot of time, doing multiple iterations, trying different things, trying different approaches, and then it kind of comes out with pretty impressive outputs. So if you haven't seen, definitely go and check it out. But I think one thing I want to kind of say, and I was actually planning on saying it later as well, is like, I think Keith made a very good point, right? Like just generating text is not where the value is at. It's about what you generate. And I think similar with code, just being able to write code is not where the value is at, but it's like, what code do you write and what kind of problems do you solve with that? And that's kind of where I think we need to kind of evolve into as well. Okay, so the next part is basically a short introduction, like how to use AI. Before that, try to give some context on some of these terms that you may see coming about. So when we talk about the size of a model, we talk about the number of parameters that the model has. And this is roughly like, you can kind of think of like the computation power of this model, right? So 100 million was considered quite big, like maybe 5 or 6 years ago. But now, if you're doing anything less than like 3 billion, it's like not even considered like small. Like 3 billion is considered a small model. OpenAI's like GPT-4 is rumored to be like 1.8 trillion parameters. But what does this really mean when you kind of choose models? Generally, bigger models are better. They are able to do more complex reasoning. But this comes at a cost because then now they are slower and they are more expensive to run. So many of these like big models, it's out of reach for most small companies or startups or SMEs to run. 7 billion is probably the biggest model that you can run on like a consumer GPU. Then token, if you kind of deal with models, you have to kind of deal with this concept called tokens. And really it's just how do you represent text with numbers? Because ultimately computers doesn't understand strings or characters. It all deals with numbers. And just like how a computer, the lowest form of like denomination is a bit. In a large language model, the lowest form is a token. And generally, this is also useful to know because when you use these AI services, they charge you by the number of tokens that you use. So roughly, like one word is equal to like 1.3 tokens. And then context length. So this is the number of tokens that the model is able to take in. This includes both the input and the output. So if you have, an input of like 1,000 tokens and you want to generate a 10,000 token output, you need something that's at least like 11,000 context length. So again, kind of show some numbers of common context lengths, right? Older models generally are around 512. Most models nowadays, they're at 4K. There are some that are like 32K, and recently Google released a model that's 1 million context length. One thing to note is that, being able to use this length doesn't mean being able to use it well, right? You may be able to kind of see all of this information, but just like a human, like if it kind of goes in one year, goes out the other year, it won't give any good results. So some models are better than others in terms of making use of that context length. So kind of choosing your models, I think there's basically two main categories, using like proprietary models or kind of open models. I've kind of listed out some of the best proprietary models by OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google, as well as some of the more popular open models. And as well as there's a lot of community about like fine-tuning and creating models for very specific use cases. But my recommendation is, just start with the best models available to validate and prototype. Figure out whether or not this AI feature is something that's useful to your product, even if it's maybe a bit more expensive than using a smaller model. I think for general use case, this is my preference in terms of various models. Like I think the 𝗚𝗺𝗲𝗶𝘇𝗲 model is one of the best models. One thing to note here as well, when I kind of talk about best models, is that if you have only used, kind of free models, so like ChatGPT 3.5 or, any of the other free models, I'll highly recommend, at least pay for the subscription for 1 month to try out any of these like better models, because the quality, the difference in what you can do with the models is quite big. And oftentimes when people tell me that, the AI cannot solve some of the tasks that they're trying to do, my first question is like, which model are you using? Oh, they're using the free model. Then I'm like, okay, yeah, that's why. For longer inputs, I mentioned Google released this Gemini Pro model. It has like 1 million context language. Actually, it's very impressive. So for context, like there's 700K words, 30K lines of code, so on and so forth. But it's not available yet. It's still under like developer preview. But I've tested it and it works really well. Like it's really able to make use of that full 1 million context length, as opposed to previous models which have had this context length but were not very effective with that. Yeah.
Sorry, Vivek, when you say you have tested it, what's the context or use case you're testing this for?
So for me, I tested it in my company's kind of use case, right? We deal with very large PDF documents, and information is put in like quite different places. So for example, you may have a table in page 700, and it has kind of references to another kind of table in like page 750 or something. So I basically asked this model to basically give me information that kind of joins these two data together, and it was able to kind of run through this, extract out both the tables, output basically if you kind of know like databases, kind of like a left join of these two tables together. I think it's super impressive because one, like being able to kind of work with such long documents, like finding the correct information, and then even doing the kind of reasoning required to kind of do this kind of joining of data. Yeah, it's really quite impressive kind of capabilities that it might unlock.
Right. Actually, I was also going to ask, what is a Handshakes? Which model is Handshakes using as well?
It's kind of a difficult question because we deal with a lot of sensitive data, and a lot of the data we are not allowed to basically upload to any proprietary models, right?
Yeah.
So actually, my recommendation is not what we do. We build our own like open models and fine tune like for ourselves.
And are the skill sets and data transferable?
I think it's
across
quite
the
different.
models.
Oh, you mean across the models, is it?
Yeah.
I think so. Like if you're kind of using like a model as a service, the kind of skill sets that you need is more like how do you kind of talk to that model? How do you make it give the correct output that you want? If you are training the model on your own, it's really a very different skill set, because now you need to understand about like training data. You need to understand about like what makes good training, what makes bad training. It's really a very different skill set.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So this can be a topic on its own, but this basically the idea is called retrieval augmented generation, and it's the idea that you want to make sure your AI is grounded with like external information, because ChatGPT doesn't know about your documentation. ChatGPT doesn't know about how you do things in your company. It doesn't know about content that you have. So how do you kind of deal with that? It can get quite complex, but the most simple idea is that you have some kind of query, and then you retrieve the relevant context for that query, and then you give that context and the query to the model, and you ask it to either create something or answer the question. Yeah, Llama Index is a good place to start. Yeah, it's really a very long topic, so I won't talk too much about it. But so this is how you kind of create content based on content that you already have, PDF documents, internal code bases, Confluence, and all that. Okay, the next part is really about how do you really use AI better, and the technical term for this is prompt engineering, but really it's like how do you talk with the AI? Again, some terms to kind of define before we get started. A prompt is basically the input to the model, and a system prompt is some kind of meta instructions on how to respond. So this generally like instructions like how should you behave, how should you respond, what kind of answer should you answer to, what kind of answer should you refuse to answer to. User prompt is like your user input to the model, and then the assistant prompt is the model's previous output. So this is quite useful when you're doing like conversation style, which I will show an example later. A prompt template is just a special way to arrange these prompts such that it is understandable by the model. And generally, this is different for every model, but if you're using some kind of API service, then you'll be taken care at the API level. So talk about prompts, right? So this is just kind of a simple example of like how prompting works. So there's a system prompt, you're a helpful assistant, and then you say hi. It's like model response, hello, how may I help you? And then you say like, can you tell me the temperature in Singapore? Model says, okay, the average temperature in Singapore is 25 degrees to 31 degrees. Now you ask like, what about rainfall? And notice that in this particular question, I didn't ask about what's the rainfall in Singapore. And the model is able to output that, the rainfall in Singapore is like 2 meters, some amount lah. But basically, the reason why this works is that when you pass the input to the model, you basically pass a list of the previous messages. And hopefully this helps to kind of demystify the kind of behavior you see with ChatGPT, right? Like it's able to kind of remember what you have done. It's able to kind of understand the context of like follow-up questions. And hopefully you can see that actually it's not so magical. You're just kind of passing the history back to it, and it's using the history to answer your questions. And so then what can you do with system prompts, right? Like it's just a fun example, like make the model only reply in emojis. If you say hi, it kind of waves back at you. Oh no, a recipe to make like cookies. And it kind of gives a bunch of emojis which, butter, egg, all these kind of make a cookie. It's more of a fun example, but really it's just to show that the system prompt basically can use it to kind of constrain the model to do specific things that you want it to do. I'm kind of running out of time. I'll kind of speed this up a bit. How to prompt. I think the general idea is like, you want to set up the model not to fail. And one way of kind of thinking at that is like, if you were to onboard, a new intern into your company, he knows nothing about your business, knows nothing about what you kind of do. How do you kind of give instructions to them? How do you kind of give examples of like previous work that they're supposed to follow? So you kind of mimic how a human will kind of complete the task. Create some kind of structure, show examples. So this is basically like you teach it how to fish. So you show examples of the prompt of how to answer. So previously I talked about like sentiment classification, right? So you can kind of show examples of sentences and then show how it's supposed to respond. And one good thing is that then the model kind of follows this format. It doesn't kind of say, okay, this sentence is positive. It just knows that it's just supposed to say like positive. And this is also useful in terms of parsing that out and using that as some kind of programmatic input to something else. It's quite interesting that something like this works. Just telling the model, you are like a world-class programmer, you are like a world-class like engagement expert. That kind of just puts it in a different mindset and is able to, output much better results. Give some context about yourself. So like, assume I have no JavaScript. So assume I have JavaScript experience, but no Python experience. Tailor my responses based on that. I think this is where kind of is very kind of level up how you kind of prompt models. So you create some kind of structure and try to mimic how a human may go about to kind of solve this. So you kind of compare these two prompts, right? The left is like, summarize this story into key plot points. If you're a human, you haven't really done something like this, you may not really know how to do it. But if you have a lot of experience, maybe you know that, okay, the first step is like, I find the key players, I find the major plot points, and then, for each plot points, I kind of find the consequences. Then I add that back in, and then I redo the summary based on that. So it really gives the model understanding of how to really solve that problem. Sometimes you can even just ask the model to create a good prompt to prompt itself. It kind of works a bit unreasonably well. There's also like meta prompt by 𝗚𝗺𝗲𝗁 and like compiling language models by DSPY. Just leave some links here for people to kind of explore more. But one thing I want to kind of emphasize here, right, is that domain knowledge is much, much more important than AI knowledge. Like everything I showed here, it doesn't require like AI knowledge to get the model to do something useful. And you notice that actually having knowledge about how your tasks are done, how something like engagement is done currently. If you want to offload that to a model, you can't just tell the model to say like, okay, make this guy engaged, right? The model is not going to it's not going to be of any use. It's the same as you tell somebody, make the other guy engaged. Like now the person has to figure out what does engaged mean? What are examples of being engaged? How do people get engaged? So, and hopefully then this kind of gives people more confidence to kind of start using AI more in their workflows, because I mean, just to emphasize again, right, like the domain knowledge is what is way more important. At this point, any questions? Okay. If not, then I think the next thing is really, the last part is just like, how do I kind of keep up, how do I keep up with like AI trends? What I personally use, I think like Twitter is kind of the best kind of source for like recent but kind of high signal stuff. But it really depends on
now known as ads.com.
Yeah, now known as X. But it really depends on who you follow and what kind of people you follow. So focus on like really high people who kind of have really high signal to noise ratio. You can kind of check out my follows. I think they are a good place to start. Machine Learning Singapore, this is a meetup that happens like once every month. I've been attending this since like 2019 or so. The talks are really a mix of really some of the latest research, but as well as like really practical tips on like getting started. And especially now, the community of like people building with AI has increased quite a lot. And so there's really a good community that, if you kind of attend, you can kind of talk to people, get ideas, get help even on stuff, kind of problems that you're facing. One of the organizers, Sam, he has a YouTube channel, which, I think is pretty good as well. So you should check it out. So if not, then that's all. This definitely took more than 20 minutes, but hopefully this was useful.
It was awesome, Vivek. I think you should prepare for a second career, be a keynote speaker, right? I think for a lot of us, it's our first time actually attending such a talk, right? And I think you have given a really good starting ground for us to get our hands dirty, right? It's very practical and actionable. Thank you so much for that. You mentioned that you have a follow, you have a list of people to follow, right? Is a hyperlink inside your slide?
If you
go to my
thing, it basically goes to my Twitter account, and then you can see my following.
Wonderful. And the machine learning SG meetup is a once a month meetup?
Roughly once a month, yeah.
Great. Yeah, I think some of us would love to be there. Prashant also says that Twitter is also his to-go these days as well. Right. Guan, right, over to you.
Well, actually, I was just going to turn the floor over to anyone with questions. I think there were some questions that were on the back burner. Perhaps now, feel free to unmute yourself and ask Vivek the questions directly.
Or if you're shy, you can just ask the questions on the chat. But I really like the idea of getting AI, getting AI to create the prompts for you, right? Because personally, that is not an easy way. It's not easy to get started. We are so used to answering questions, right? It's harder to actually learn. We're so used to answering questions, but it's actually harder to ask, someone to crystallize the prompts as well. So that's a very useful tip. I think Kirsty also shared that as well in our catch-up sessions.
Hey, hi, Vivek.
Hey, hi.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey,
right,
no
so
problem.
it's good to see you. And yeah, just now you asked whether your work is being used in Gametize. Well, I believe we have your legacy code still being intertwined with our application today, right? So that still lives in Gametize for a longer time. Actually, I have some questions. Actually, it was posted in the Gametize challenge, right? But I think during the conversation, during your presentation, you have like somewhat give certain abstract to some of them.
Okay.
Right, because definitely this is something that we want to do, and we have actually done some testing as well, right? But then you actually gave us new knowledge as well, right? So because we do have questions like if you want to start fine-tuning, training AI, proprietary versus open models, right? So you are already giving us some of the inputs. Okay, but we want to start with a basic hygiene, right? For example, like when we traverse through what's available out there, even for the open model where we supposed to install them in, like, for example, high-performing servers. So we have a simple question, for example, like costings. Is AI to begin with, right? If someone wants to make use of AI, wants to start making full extensive usage of AI, whether it's for machine learning to analyze data, or maybe large language model to assist their end users, right? Is this still a piece of technology which is reserved for company with substantial resources, or can actually anyone already embark on it?
Yeah. So I think that's a very good question, right? I think one of the things that, I would say it's actually harder to get started with like open source models and like fine tuning it. And even kind of deploying these kind of open source models gets very expensive because unless you have the volume to kind of make use of it, you're paying for the GPU like per hour, right? And you may not be able to utilize the volume that someone like OpenAI might be getting. So I would say that if you want to get started actually using these like proprietary models, using them as APIs, there are even some companies that host open source models as APIs. So Together.ai is one that I've actually used personally and is pretty cheap, right? And the good thing about kind of using APIs is that you pay per use, right? You pay per call that you make. And generally these kind of calls are like at 0.0 something cents kind of thing. So, even with a budget of like $10, you can do quite a lot of like experimentation. And then you kind of figure out, is there value? Is there value in kind of making this further, putting it into production? And then you may have to kind of figure out, okay, if I kind of put in production, estimated how much cost would it take? And is that a worthwhile investment in AI?
I see.
Yeah.
So if you're using proprietary model, for example, if we are feeding it data for learning, right? Will that data becomes, because just now someone brought up privacy issues as well, or actually yourself, right? So will that piece of data becomes collective
Correct.
resource and knowledge of OpenAI?
Yeah, so their terms of service says that for their API models, they will not save the data lah. Or rather, I think they specifically say they will not save it. They will not use it for training. But whether or not you trust them, I think that's a decision that you need to make. For my company, we do not lah. And also because we are dealing with like client sensitive data, then we are not comfortable kind of passing this kind of data to these proprietary models.
Understand.
You can also kind of look at like, what we kind of do is that we kind of try to segregate what are data that is, maybe not so sensitive. So for example, like maybe user actions, right? Like, or maybe user queries. Those are not really so sensitive, at least in our use case. So maybe we are kind of okay with sending some sort of data to proprietary models, but there are certain classes of data which, you should never kind of leave, or you should never kind of go into someone else's server.
Understand. That's very useful information, right? Especially when you use the. Okay, now I know better to differentiate them. Okay.
Thanks.
Right.
Vivek, Ashutosh has a question. Could you name a few voice chatbots that could be integrated to authoring tools?
So there are two parts, right? I'm not sure what authoring tools per se is, but for voice, there's basically two things. So one is converting like sound to text, and then converting text back to sound. So I think for sound to text, there's actually an open source model by OpenAI. It's called 𝗚𝗺𝗲𝗶. It works really well. You can even test it on like, YouTube channels, and probably even like Zoom. They're probably using some variant of 𝗚𝗺𝗲 for their transcription. So I think that's the kind of industry standard for speech transcription. For text to speech, it's more being done by like companies as a service. So there are a few that I kind of know of. I haven't really like evaluated them in terms of pricing and all that. I think there's like 11 Labs, there's Author.ai. Yeah, to be honest, I haven't really done like a survey of like these companies because I've not had the need to use such a thing. But generally for speech to text, for text to speech is more being done by like proprietary models now.
Any other questions from the floor?
A question actually. So let's say, okay, this is from a perspective of Gametize, right? So let's say I want to use a AI model and I want it to generate a project for me because, hey, learning all the gamification tools is too tough, or going for the professional designer course is just outside my reach right now, right? And I want to use AI prompt. Then how do I feed the context of what Gametize is as a product, what I can do with it? I would still need to transcribe that somehow in order to feed that context to the AI, right? Is there any way that I can make it understand this without having to do all that legwork?
I think at this point, it's still not at the stage where you can just kind of point it at your company and it figures out what exactly you do. So that's why I kind of mentioned, like, you really have to figure out like, and I think one very useful kind of technique, which I'll repeat, is like, how do you onboard a new intern? So if you were to ask an intern to kind of create this project, like what's the kind of resources, what's the kind of help that you will give to them? I think if you kind of think from it from that perspective and kind of error on giving more information than less, you generally will get quite good results. Definitely with like some of these, as models kind of improve, as context lengths increase, maybe you can just kind of pass in your entire knowledge base, and maybe in the future models are able to do that. But I think at this stage, not yet.
Perhaps,
I think
yep, sorry. Keith, you were...
I was going to say, I think a lot of us have a lot of questions because we're still, trying to prompt the questions in our head. But Vivek, do you have another 10 more minutes?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Great. We can have an after party, right? We'd like to have like maybe Kingsley shared about his work with OpenAI, right? And then we would like you to do a tear down, right? You don't need to give face. Okay, Kingsley, over to you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Let me share my screen.
So to give a bit of context, Kingsley created two different bots on OpenAI, and one is to help with the 6D playbook. Right now, our 6D playbook is our framework to help people think about what's the exact problem statement you're trying to solve, and what is the profile, and what is the design narrative. And then the second one, which is to generate the content that comes in different forms, such as quizzes, video challenges, or QR codes, right? That's the second robot. So maybe Kingsley can focus on the content expert, right? And that's the one that we are able to upload maybe a PDF and we generate out the list of like challenges. It's still a very in its infancy stage, but I'll leave it to Kingsley to share about the work he has done over here.
Okay, I think I will start with the backend first, because the reason I created this is there is an issue that I want to solve. So just a little bit context for you. I'm in the project management team, so I have to manage clients, and also in the client engagement teams, I have to deal with new or potential clients. So the issue coming is when there are too much tasks in my hand, and you still need to come up with a gamification content or even a plan for your clients. So this is where I think of, hey, why can't I just use ChatGPT? So like you mentioned just now, I tried ChatGPT 3.5 and it can't solve my problem, because it will just give the answers that is all around the world. It will just give the answers that you can find online, but it's not accurate at all. So this is when I think of, why don't I just subscribe to the paid version to try on the custom ChatGPTs. So a little bit for your context, how I created these bodies. From what I understand is it has a large database. So in order to make sure that the bot can focus on certain area, you have to give the bot instructions. So this is what I do. I give a profile and a role to the ChatGPT bot. For example, I tell this bot that you are a gamification expert, content expert, 20 years of experience. So your main purpose is to create gamification content. And I also let this bot know that what kind of service you're going to provide to users. You help the users to generate content for many use for Gametize platform. So you start a service by collecting some details. Now, in different prompts that I have tried, I realized that it's important to give examples and so give the more context in the instructions, how the bot will interact with the users. So this is where I come up with different steps. Like for example, the first step, you have to welcome the users, and I give example for more context. And then the second step, the third step, and the fourth step. And one last thing is, I realized that this is also very useful during the time when I fine-tuning it, because the ChatGPT will always learn from the conversations. So it might be good if the bot can always ask the user whether this is a good answer or require any changes. And later on, the next step I use it is to make sure that this bot have a certain personalities. So it has to be a respectful tone and privacies. And most importantly, don't copy from the others. Make sure that all the content you generate is the original one. And the result is, let me pass it for you. So I have created 2 conversation starters to help the users on board. So you just need to click on let's get started, and it will welcome you with a welcome message, and it will guide you what to do. So you just need to input your text or just give me a document that you would like to use it to create a Gametize content. So in this case, I will use this PDF file that I download online, and I'll type proceed. Then you sort of read out the documents and you ask you which type of content you would like to create. So how this ChatGPT know what are the content type that is available in Gametize? I have fine tuning on the back end. So basically I just copy paste and create a list of document. This content can do what is this content is all about, and feed it to these ChatGPTs, and it learn. So after that, it sort of get the informations of the different contents that you have. So for example, 3 flashcards, 3 single attempt, quiz challenge, and then it will just give you all the answers. Like for example, flashcard wise, there is a topic and a description. So it will give you the content that you can straight away just copy and paste. And then for quiz challenge, right, he also gives you a correct answers based on the questions that he asks. So far, this is how I have built it. Any feedback so far that I can improve in fine tuning?
I think like what I would ask is really, is this good enough right now? Like if not, what is preventing your users from using it right now?
These are very good questions. To be honest, this is just recently completed. So we are inviting our users to try it out so far. And then I think the only challenge right now for me as a user is how can I export this content and then import in our own solutions. So the only way that I can think of is to basically export in an Excel file. So when you download this Excel file, you in a format that you can copy and paste more easier. Easier. Yeah, that's what I did for now.
Yeah. So I think that's a good point now, right? And some ideas like how you can kind of overcome that. One thing is like you get the model to output in some kind of structured form. So maybe you ask it to output in like JSON or YAML, and then that becomes something that you can just copy, and then your app can kind of accept that programmatic language, right?
Understand.
Yeah. The other kind of thing is that you can also kind of imagine that you can, instead of using it through the ChatGPT interface, if you use like GPT-4 API, you can do a lot of this kind of stuff within, say, the Gametize app itself. And like as it's kind of generating this, then you can actually generate the the UI elements that goes into a flashcard or a quiz and all that. So again, it's the same thing. It's like you have a JSON output, but then now you automatically pass that to your app site, and then you kind of show what the output would look like.
Great, thanks. Thank you so much. Do you have any framework or any prompt framework that you recommend for us?
Prompt framework. I think if you are using the API library, I think there's this library called Instructor. Let me find the
Instructor.
Yeah, let me just paste that on the chat. So I think that library helps to kind of generate structured outputs from kind of the API models.
Okay, we have about 4 more minutes to go. Anyone has questions for Vivek, or even about I suppose how Gametize has deployed ChatGPT into our framework itself, our platform? Please feel free to ask now, or well, just don't have the regret of not having asked your question. If you do have questions that sort of pop into your head after this session, you can still go on to Gametize happenings, and we'll keep it up for a long while, for a while from here, and Vivek can put his response in that as well, if it's not too much trouble for Vivek.
So right now I am inspired to use AI to create training for AI. Right, using prompts in AI to help create content to help people learn. Because I think it's not an easy topic to grasp. There's different complexity, and I'm sure what Vivek has given us today, the glimpse is very, very base level. But to really unlock the true potentials, right, we have to get familiar with the jargons. And now I'm still trying to catch up with the different prompts. I never knew there were so many different prompts before today. And so there are a lot of courses out there. I just want to give a quick plug to Adaptive AI. We have some representative here, 𝗚𝗺𝗲𝗁𝗲, right? They provide gamified AI training, right? For any companies that's interested to get on board. So we look forward to more such educators like Vivek coming on board, right? To share his knowledge. But Vivek, thank you so much. I really think you need to be a keynote speaker. A lot of potential, and I feel like I hope this is not the last time we will cross path, right? To talk about gamification and AI. But I have one last question, right? I'm still quite curious about Handshakes, and there's hundreds of you in globally, right, worldwide. And you mentioned that the AI research team, there's 5 of you, and then for the software engineers, AI engineers, there's another team altogether.
Yep.
So how do you all really separate your scope of work, and are there how big are the overlaps?
I mean, just to give some context, like when I first joined the company like 6 years ago, there wasn't a engineering team even. Like there was an AI team, but there wasn't an engineering team. So we kind of basically did everything, right? Like from data collection to building the models and then deploying it. What we found is that once you deploy the models, there's also quite a lot of work in terms of monitoring and ensuring that the models that don't come to errors, especially if you're kind of dealing with a lot of these cloud services where there's all sorts of like arcane errors. So after a while, and as the company expanded, the team kind of split up into kind of more AI engineering and then more AI research. So on the research team, we are focused more on like finding new ways to improve our products. And I think one thing kind of special about our team or like our company is that the research team is all very technical people, but actually we sit under the products umbrella as opposed to kind of the engineering umbrella. So we report directly to the chief product officer. We kind of are in products meeting, and it's really because we believe that when we're kind of building the features, actually figuring out what to build is more important, and kind of figuring out like how to kind of build it and what is important and not important in like AI features. Yeah, so then the engineering team is more focused on kind of more different things like ensuring uptime, ensuring that there's no degradation of like services to users, ensuring there's like good upgrade capabilities and so on.
I see. So they are not just AI engineers. They are also they do other kinds of like deployments.
Correct. Yeah, and they're also the ones who kind of integrate with the apps and like
I see.
Integrate with our data pipelines, database, and all that.
Got it. But in terms of like testing out the model that you have proposed to them, then wouldn't that be still under your scope of work, more or less? Yeah. Because I see.
So before the model kind of gets the green light to go into like the AI engineering side, like we must have, proven enough. I mean, we must have done enough testing and kind of ensure that we are happy with it, and we have presented it to, the products, and products is kind of agreed that this is in line with what we want and so
on. And there's 5 of you, like the AI research team is 5 of you. And how do you all like separate your scope of work as well? Or is there a particular focus each of you have?
I think for now we are quite independent. Like everyone kind of does a particular project. So in my team, like everyone kind of picks up a project, and you're expected to lead it and you're ultimately responsible for that project lah.
I see. What's the project, Vivek?
For me now, I'm working on this thing of like doing this like verification of user data.
Oh, wow.
It's part of like a larger kind of product that my company is building out, and it's like one portion of that.
Oh, that's going to be huge, man. Verification of user data.
Yep.
Well, thank you for your time, Vivek. Right? Can we all give him a round of applause? Right? Virtual one. I'm very glad to make this happen, Vivek. Let's catch up. Our office are supposed to be beside each other. It's actually in the Fortune Center, and we are in Waterloo Center. Right. Let's make that happen one day.
Sure.
All
definitely.
right. Right. Okay. Thanks, Team Gametize, for being here as well. And I think external guests, some of them have left, but we'll share the video recording with all the rest of you. Right. Take care and
Thanks.
have a good rest of the day and upcoming weekend, everyone.
Okay.
All
right.
Bye.
See you, Alton. Right. Looking forward to seeing your submission as well for certification.
Still working on it.
Yep. Use AI. Yeah.
Sorry?
Use AI to help you out.
Of course, I'm using
Of course.
all the tools.
But Alton, if you don't mind just think around, what other tools are you using to help you with your AI content, with your Gametize content?
Okay. I'm using ChatGPT, and I'm using DALL-E for the image production. Also, I used your tool in ChatGPT, the 60 tool. I was asking for some contents, and also I'm using your description producer in Gametize app. It's very useful. I'm just using the title, and it's
Devon and Prashant's project, right?
Yeah. And I've got some question ideas in my mind, so I'm giving them to your tool in ChatGPT, and it really generates some good question and some good answers for the questions. Also, we made a good hangman games together. He or she, I don't know, but it's so helpful for me.
Yeah, still work in progress. Please give your feedback generously. To be honest, that the AI description, it was going to be, we created it so that we can get familiar with the whole process, and I think we want to spend more time on it eventually. But as of right now, right, there's a lot of different models, and we are also figuring out what's our strategy. But we look forward to your feedback. Thank you so much, Alton.
Of course, I will. See you. Bye-bye.
Right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
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 Bye.